lost private. We're in Normandy.
Thanks for checking in here at the We're Not Lost Private podcast. We appreciate all your support. But do you know how else you can support us? By signing up at Patreon. For $3 a month, you'll have access to all of our episodes, plus access to all kinds of bonus material, like our quarterly newsletter, photographs, and official paperwork, and research that goes into each and every show. You can follow the pod on a multitude of platforms such as YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, pretty much anywhere you catch your pods. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. Welcome, everybody, to We're Not Lost Private Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Muccia. I didn't announce what episode this is because I don't know where I'm going to drop this one. But due to popular demand, I've decided to do another show on Easy Company myths, although this one is more like just some storytelling. There was a big demand, like I said, after I dropped the last show. Heavily viewed, lots of comments and emails back to the to the group email. Really enjoyed the discourse that came with it. Thanks to the Band of Brothers Company headquarters Facebook page for their continued support. They routinely will put this up when I do these shows, and I'm happy to do them, and I'm glad everybody's getting something out of it. So, with that said, again, when I looked at the idea of doing another show on Easy Company, I really looked at what has been made available of late in terms of the offerings on certain YouTube channels, and seeing again a lot of urban myth being tossed around. I figured it would be good to get in there and just do another show where we kind of address some of those things that are floating around. But then again, like I said, just started to work through a bunch of different stories and things, and you know, stories that I know, and things that I know about the men from interviewing them and talking with them over the years, that I figured the audience would find pretty interesting. So let's kick this bad boy off. First off, again, well, just a few pieces of advice as you go to look for Easy Company content and Band of Brothers content across the social media apps out there. Separate the wheat from the chaff, and what that means is just look for the quality and the depth of the information. Be careful on your consumption of the content out there, because a lot of it is not good. If it looks hastily thrown together, it's probably poorly researched. Does it substitute flashy graphics and AI for accurately researched content? And does it rely too much on urban legend and controversial topics? Again, these are going to be the linchpins as you go around looking for information about Easy Company and our favorite miniseries. Just keep those things in the back of your mind. And if it looks like the producer has something to hide, then they're probably not researching properly. But because another video has popped up about Eddie Mauser, and it looks like it's a reaction video to what I posted in my previous version of this, and we'll call it episode 1 or part 1. Eddie, wonderful guy, but he did a number of interviews, and a lot of those interviews misquoted him. And if those are your only sources of information about his experiences during the war, then you should be wary of them. And the sub bullet there is Eddie was oftentimes misquoted in articles, and the interviewers made him, or I would say guided him, to make more definitive statements than he was probably wanting to make. And again, this all goes back to his statements about Sobel on D-Day. All right. And again, I spoke with him a number of times, and he was, as it says there, less sure of his memories when speaking off the record or in one-on-one interviews. And he was, again, genuinely fun and funny guy who loved the attention that band afforded him. Now, you also have to understand the thing about Eddie was his wife did not want him reliving the war. And out of respect for her, he decided that he was not going to keep in contact with the men he served with over the course of his lifetime. That is until his wife passed away. Once she passed away, Eddie felt like that embargo was lifted, and he decided he wanted to talk to the men he served with, and he wanted to meet with them, and he he wanted to enjoy the celebrity that band would afford him as a veteran of that company. And nobody is saying that this is not good, or nobody is holding it against him that he did so. He loved the audience. He especially loved being showered at attention from the young ladies. Ed was definitely appreciative of all of the attention that he got. But sometimes his memory wasn't too sharp when it needed to be, and when he would do his interviews, he would make statements that were more definitive than he actually remembered. And I know this from sitting down with him on a number of occasions, and then talking with him on the phone. And doesn't make him a bad guy, and it doesn't make him a liar or anything like that. It's just, as I talked about in the previous episode of this, memories fail. And again, Eddie never saw Sobel land by parachute, nor did he ever see him with a parachute harness on. So those are two indicators that he is not a credible witness when it comes to whether or not Sobel jumped. And with that in mind, I would just lean on the paperwork that exists with regards to Sobel and his landing. Outside of that, Eddie had some great memories of his time in service, especially during the Bastogne campaign. His memories added a lot of context to some other things that went on. And when I release my volumes about Easy Company, you'll get to read about some of those instances. But great guy. Again, not taking anything away from him. Just you need to have the context when you read articles about him and what he experienced. And a lot of times, if that's the only thing out there, we don't have that context, and we'll pin everything on that in terms of an accurate account. The best thing I found interviewing the men was to find two of them that were in the same squad or the same section with each other, because they tended to be able to keep each other on an accurate line when you were talking to them. And in this case, there were still several members of Second Platoon that were alive at the time and that Eddie could bounce his memories off of. And having access to folks like Bill and Babe and other members of Second Platoon was definitely a good point in terms of Eddie's ability to remember the war accurately. So over the years, like I said, I had a number of chances to talk to him, and then I was able to bounce the stuff he was giving me back off of the other men, which helped me get a more accurate story put together when it comes to Eddie. Enough said about that. Moving on, this one, Winter's Court Martial, always cracks me up about the Winter's Court Martial is what everybody thinks they know about it, and then what was the second order effect that came from the Winter's Court Martial. And we'll discuss that on the next slide. But with regard to Winters and Sobel, there had been I don't want to say animosity building, but there's definitely an internal competition that was building over time since the earliest days of the company. And much of this had to do with the nature of Sobel's leadership and the nature of Winters' leadership. Winters was much more approachable. And a number of the men told me, they couldn't believe that this man, who was an officer, was interested in them and interested in their well-being and interested in their performance and interested in making sure they did everything they could to keep them alive throughout the war. Whereas Sobel was very aloof because that's the way he was trained as an officer, and that's what his idea of being an officer was. I'm making an assessment there based on everything that we know about him. And I've known a lot of officers like that in my time in the military. They keep everyone at an arm's length because it doesn't afford them the proper level of objectivity in their mind to make decisions about the career and lives of their men. Not only that, in reading a lot of Colonel Strayer's papers, he felt that Sobel was operating under the edict of what Sink and Strayer laid out in terms of the weeding/culling of unqualified people from the ranks when the 506 first stood up. Sobel obviously took that mandate to heart, and coupled with his leadership style, you got the that mixture of what we've saw in the miniseries, and what guys like Bill Garnier told me was the one in the miniseries not nearly as bad as the actual Sobel in terms of his exacting discipline. Now, because Winters not only was an effective officer and a popular one, this brought him into direct conflict with Sobel in terms of how Sobel viewed competition between Winters and himself with regards to we'll call it affection, but it's not really affection. We'll call it maybe loyalty between the men and the officers. And Winters himself wrote about it and stated basically Sobel would just get meaner and meaner when he thought there was that open competition. Now, all of this comes to a head in England. They show the whole wire cutting scene, and I'm not going to get into the differences between that and reality. We'll just suffice it to say that the incident did occur, and Sobel needed somebody to blame. And in this case, it was his acting executive officer. It was Winters. So, the thing with Winters, he always said, I didn't mind being the executive officer, but if I was just being the executive officer. But not only did he have that duty, but he was also the platoon leader for first platoon. So he's doing multiple jobs at one time, and he felt like it should have been one or the other. But anyway, because of what happened, because it happened with first platoon in terms of the wire cutting, Sobel blamed Winters, and this led to the court-martial piece to this. Now, I've also put a picture of Jackie Mello up there. Jackie was the trooper that was on duty cleaning latrines which was basically the impetus behind the court-martial piece. Winters always said Mello did a fantastic job in cleaning latrines. And you saw much of the exchange in the miniseries, which was based on reality. It was based on Winters' recollection of what happened, and based on the paperwork, because you can search around on the internet and find copies of the court-martial document where Winters signs off on it and endorses it. The interesting thing was that that's not a singular document. There's actually a series of them. And it shows essentially the back and forth between Winters and Sobel over the court-martial. And by Strayer's own admission, once Winters pushed the button for the court-martial trial by court-martial, it really threw the staff into a tizzy about how to do this. And essentially, what Strayer did was stall. He would stall for time to hope that the situation would kind of diffuse itself, which it didn't. But in the end, he chose the option of reassigning Winters vice court-martialing him. So at the end of the day, the court-martial happens but doesn't really happen. There is no actual court-martial. Winters doesn't stand in front of a court and plead his case, and Sobel on the opposite side pleads his case, and then decisions made. Basically, it was Strayer basically diffusing the situation by putting a stay on the proceedings in light of the upcoming invasion, and reassigns Winters. But this provides a bit of a conundrum, because there's obviously something going on in Easy Company, and Strayer is well aware of it. And this will end up leading to the next issue, which is the mutiny itself, and who knew what and who did what. The way it's portrayed in the miniseries is not accurate at all. I think it was Hollywooded up a little bit, and I've talked to Eric about it a little bit, and he said, yeah, we kind of went with what we knew, and then we added some things to make it happen. Add the dramatic notes to it. At the end of the day, Sobel was probably well aware of what was going on. Winters definitely knew what was going on. At one point, he was approached by Mike Ranney, who told him what was going on. And in the process of Ranney describing what they were planning on doing, Sobel walked in, and they had to redirect the conversation. And I want to say it went back to unit calisthenics was how Ranny tried to deflect the situation. But Sobel was probably well aware that things were going on in the ranks behind his back. And Strayer was aware that there was unrest in the ranks and knew something had to give. Now, the 3 platoon sergeants were the NCOs that drove this. The other NCOs were not involved. There's a great scene in the miniseries where they're all signing their resignation letters, and they're going to put them in the inbox so Sobel sees them first thing in the morning. That doesn't happen. It's Ranny and Terrence Salty Harris from 3rd Platoon. The two of them had actually approached 2nd Platoon Sergeant Jimmy Dial and explained what they were going to do. Now, we never got Dial's version of this because he's later killed in combat in Holland. But basically, my assessment is that Dial believed that this was a threat to good order and discipline and didn't want to take part in it. And so he doesn't take part of it. And at one point, if memory is correct, Ranny stated that they actually went to Evans to talk to him. So, and Evans undoubtedly went back to Sobel to let him know what was going on. And he obviously declined to take part in this. So at the end of the day, and I believe I covered this in the previous Myths episode, Ranny is busted and is assigned to Item Company of the 506. Harris is busted and he's assigned to B Company of the 506. Now, both of them are recruited by Wally Moore, who a former 3rd Platoon, Easy Company 3rd platoon leader, and they're recruited for the Pathfinders. And right before the invasion, Ranny requests, and this is after Sobel is relieved and sent to Chilton Foliot, and Ranny requests permission to rejoin the company as a private, and Winters, who's essentially back as the 1st platoon leader, but he's not the XO. He basically stumps for it, and me and Sweeney, who's the acting XO, approve it. So Ranny rejoins the company and goes right back to 1st platoon as a private. So that is who knew what and who did what at the time of the Sobel mutiny. The next topic I want to cover is this fairly well-known picture. And for those of you just listening along, don't worry, I'll have these posted up on our Patreon page so you can take a look at them. Well-known photograph taken by Forrest Guth of Easy's 3rd Platoon. And it shows a aircraft crash with John Lee Eubanks in the background, looking over the debris of the crash. This has been identified as Stick 66 for as long as I can remember. And in short, that's incorrect. It's not. This is, if memory serves, it's one of the 501st sticks, or maybe 502nd. I can't remember, but it is definitely not Stick 66, because based on my discussions with Forrest, this was taken as they were moving towards rejoining the company outside of Carentan. It was not taken up near Baseville-Upland, where the actual Stick 66 crash site is located. But you'll see this trotted out on almost every web page and video when they start talking about the crash of Stick 66. Unfortunately, it's not. And I'll go back, and once I post this, I'll put the regiment and the company of which this aircraft was part of up for our Patreon subscribers. But anyway, just so everyone knows, that is not Stick 66 that's depicted in those photographs. Joe Toye's jump injury. This one is kind of a direct response to a video that's put out on one of those other channels. And to me, it's a tribute to the dedication of the filmmakers when they were putting the miniseries together, and what was depicted and what was allowed to be researched and then inserted at a late time to increase accuracy. And what I'm referring to is when Joe Toye was equipped with a leg bag. And for those of you who are not familiar with a leg bag, it's basically a small duffel bag rigged with a drop line that the wearer could extend once they got close to the ground. So the bag, they could carry more equipment and then released this bag. It's based on it's a British design, and worked very well for them. But the paratroopers, the American paratroopers who utilize it, didn't have enough time to train on it or jump with it. They were literally given to it almost at the last moment. So they were advised, this thing's good for about 20 pounds of equipment. Well, most of the guys placed way more than 20 pounds in it. Well, so Joe Toye, not wanting to leave the drop rope itself to play out without him being able to control where the bag was or be able to recover the bag once he landed, decided not only to attach it to his belt, but to run a couple of loops of it around his wrist and hand so that he could maintain positive control of it once he released the rope. What Joe didn't realize is between the weight and the prop blast and the violence of his exit, once that rope pulled down on his wrist, it bit down into the skin and essentially unsheathed part of his wrist and hand. And for those of you who don't know what that means, I'm not going to get into it because it's a fairly gory description. And so once you think about that, what happened to his hand? Well, according to Bill, after they collected Joe up, he could see the wound on his wrist and hand, and he basically said, "Hey, Joe, we've got to get you treated because you can't walk around like that." And apparently, Joe just spat on it and wrapped a handkerchief around it and said, "I'm fine, Bill. Let's go." So back to my comment about the miniseries and the dedication of the filmmakers to get it right. There's a scene where Joe is, Kirk Acevedo portraying Joe avoids being blown up by a grenade. And although I put a little snippet of it there on the display for everybody who's looking at this, if you go back and run through that sequence, at one point you'll see the cuff of Kirk's jumpsuit is unbuttoned, and you'll see just a sliver of white. And that is due to Bill informing Frank John Hughes, who later informs Kirk about what happened to Joe's hand, and therefore they had it added in. So just another insight into the dedication of the filmmakers, but also the absolute toughness of Joe Toye to keep going with that wrist injury. And by the way, he's a right-handed shooter, so that hand is the one that he would grip the stock of his rifle. And by the way, they always show him with a Thompson, but Joe carried an M1 Garand during the Normandy campaign. And in fact, one of those grenades that blew up in outside during the assault on Breakcore shattered the stock of his Garand. So just as you keep going, you got a few little extra tidbits of information there. But again, just absolutely tough as nails, Joe Toye. So I put these in kind of chronological order. So this is a photo that routinely pops up as well, kind of like the Stick 66 photo. It leads to a lot of misidentifications. This was taken during the advance into Eindhoven. Those of you who have accompanied me on tours have been to this spot before. Those of you who are interested in going on tour with me and want to go to this spot, we do it. But frankly, I want to clarify who's in this photo because it's always misidentified. And some of it has to do because of the 101st Airborne Museum down at Fort Campbell has misidentified a couple of the troopers in the picture. So we're just going to get that taken care of. Moving left to right. And again, this will be up on our Patreon page. If you're listening along, you'll be able to stop by the Patreon page and take a look at it. But on the left, incorrectly identified by the museum as a trooper named McLaurin. There was no McLaurin in Easy Company at all. In 3rd Platoon, there was a trooper by the name of Carl McCauley. That is Carl McCauley on the left, with his M1 Garand over his shoulder and his chin strap buckled up at the top of his helmet. Next to him, Amos Buck Taylor, with his back to the camera, Carwood Lipton, the first sergeant of Easy Company. And if you're looking at this, you can see on his right arm, you can just see part of his chevrons. To Carwood's right, you'll see James Alley. And to Mo Alley's right is Sergeant Bill Keene, and behind Bill Keene, looking at the group as they chat, along with a couple of Dutch civilians, is Campbell T. Smith. So I hope that maybe in the future, these IDs will be used by other folks as they if they use this photo for any material about Easy Company. What's interesting about Carwood is he doesn't have any of his web gear on. He doesn't have any no cartridge belts, no musette bag or anything, and he's carrying an M1928 Thompson. But moving on. I always get asked, did the Dutch really shave the heads of women who slept with the German soldiers? This photo right here was taken by the 101st Airborne's, well, he's also a 501 man, Al Krotchka. He started out as a regimental photographer in 501st, and later on during the war, he became the division photographer. But you can see here two photos in sequence of one of the ladies' heads being shaved. So yes, to answer the question, they most decidedly did shave the heads, as was depicted in the miniseries. And I have no doubt that this series of photos was what was the inspiration, because they came from Major Winter's personal collection. You'll see at the end of the series where he sits down with the Nix character and they talk about trading a couple of Lugers for copies of the photographs. Al Krotchka did this with a lot of different folks in the division. So these photos are featured in a lot of the veteran collections out there. What happened when a trooper was killed in action? And the photo accompanying this one is Ross McCall portraying Joe Liebkott and Michael Cudlitz portraying Denver Randleman, with Mark Lawrence as Dukeman. And obviously, this is after Dukeman is killed the next morning. And you see Ross pulling a couple of cigarettes out of a package that came out of Mark Lawrence's pocket. And you'll also notice that all of the ammunition pouches on Mark's belt are all open and empty, because this is like I described in the previous episode when we were talking about what happened with Andrew Hill's watch and Winters taking the watch. In this case, yes, it's from the miniseries. It's based on truth and based on reality. They had already taken anything of value out of that could be of value moving forward in combat. So any ammunition, any meals, watches, compass, water, food, anything that could be used later on was taken from the dead and used to resupply the living. And nothing bears it out like this still from the miniseries. Who shot Speirs in the ass in Holland? Okay, you're not going to get the answer here. It's going to be in one of my books, and I do tell the full story on my tours. But in this case, I'll at least give you the teaser. Speirs, before he went back to D Company, he was kind of a floater officer in 2nd Battalion headquarters while they were in Holland. And he had this tendency or habit to swim across the Rhine at night and kill German sentries. And the Germans would find the bodies and then shell the opposite side of the Rhine where the 101st troopers were. At some point, his extracurricular activities draw a fire that ends up causing the death of a beloved Easy Company trooper. And because of that, the next time that Speirs does this, as he gets to the north bank, a trooper in Easy Company shoots him in the rear end. Speirs crawls back to the water, swims back across, and manages to make his way back into lines. He's later given the Silver Star because to me, it was to cover up what he was doing. It's not to downplay the bravery that was involved in what he was doing, but it was more to cover the fact that he had been out there on many unauthorized missions across the Rhine, it ends up causing the death of a very popular Easy Company trooper, and another Easy Company trooper takes justice into his own hands. But he's later given the Silver Star for attempting to conduct reconnaissance of the North Shore. And in my mind, and knowing how the award system works, this is a complete cover-up. But again, if you want to find out for real who it is, hop on one of my Easy Company tours, and I'll be glad to take you to nearby where the location was where it happened, and you'll find out who it was who shot him in the butt. Lipton and Burr Smith versus the 88. Now, for those of you who look for interesting stories about things that happened to them that didn't necessarily get make it into the book or make it into the mini series, and I believe this one's in the original copy of Banned. I took my version of it right from Carwood Lipton. Those of you who are looking at this on video, these are Carwood's hand-typed notes about his time in service. They were given to Winters. Winters passed this set off to Eric Gendronson, who passed them off to me. Unfortunately, I never got a chance to talk to Carwood because he passed away before my interest in talking to the men and interviewing the men had really, really peaked. Plus, we had 9/11, and I was already on a slow trajectory either to Afghanistan or Iraq. So it really was preempted by that. But by the time I was fully vested in exchanging letters with the men and meeting the men, he had already passed. So, but I'm going to take that right from Carwood's own notes. And basically, what he said was he received an order from Lieutenant Dyke to go connect with whatever unit was on their left flank, and this would be third battalion. In reality, Carwood believed it was Item Company that he was going out to meet up with. Well, he didn't want to go by himself, and frankly, going out on a one-man mission that might broach enemy lines is probably not the smartest thing to do. And if you go in a pair, at least if somebody gets hit, the other one can bring them back, or at least go back and bring back another patrol to help recover the individual. In this case, Lip chose Burr Smith. Now, Burr Smith, after the Stick 66 shootdown, Elmer Murray was the operations sergeant for the company. And Lipton and Elmer were very, very close. Once they knew that Elmer Murray, well, they didn't know what happened to the Stick, but ostensibly, Winters needed to have somebody in that position as the acting company commander. He needed to have an operations sergeant. And at the time, Burr was a machine gunner in first platoon. So he tapped Burr Smith to be the acting operations sergeant, and later on becomes the full-time operations sergeant working company headquarters. So with Lipton being the first sergeant during that period of time, he tapped Burr to go with him to establish contact with the unit to their left. So they make their way across, according to Lip, 500 to 600 yards of no man's land early in the morning before it gets really light out. They make their way out there. They make contact with Item Company. They establish phone line because they bring out wire. So they got a direct line of communications with 3rd Battalion and an Item Company. But it's light out now, and they have to make their way back. Now, I actually misspoke because I put 88 on there because that's what Lipton that's what Lip put in his account, but he later on amended it and it wasn't an 88. And I'll tell you exactly why. But as the two begin making their way back to Easy Company's lines, they are taken under fire by a single German artillery piece. Now, 88s can fire at a flat trajectory, and the Germans had been known to fire 88s at individual troopers. We saw this in Holland, and we see this again in Bastogne. But Lip was adamant that they were firing a high arc, high trajectory barrage at them, essentially with a single piece. And because it was only a single piece, they were able to basically hopscotch their way back to company lines. And he said that I felt like the German observer for that artillery piece must have been ready to smash his field glasses because he couldn't get a bead on them and hit them. It was a couple of close calls that knocked them to the ground, but they were able to make their way back. But anyway, I always thought that was a cool story. There was a bit more to it, if I remember correctly. It was in the book band, but there was a bit more to it, and I love the fact that it's in there, and the fact that he didn't want to go out there by himself, so he dragged Burr Smith along with him, and almost gets the both of them killed. But they end up accomplishing their mission. A couple of company stories. There'll be two different slides, and a couple of stories with each one. We'll start with um, this first image, and as you can see, it is a snippet from the Fort Bragg company photo. You'll notice that outside of Gordy Carson, by the way, those names were placed there by the major. Outside of Gordy Carson, everybody else that's named there uh, ends up getting killed in action. Kind of ominous when you think about it. You have Gordy all the way to the left. Just above him, Jim Campbell, who is killed in Holland, and as many of you know, um, that his death has recounted in great detail by Babe Heffron over the years, and many of you who have gone on my tours know the full story. Eugene Jackson, um, again, one of the youngest members of the company, by the way. I believe he was 19 years old when he was killed in action at Hagenau. Um, and those of you who go on my tours, again, when we get to Bastogne, the significance of Jack's role in the recovery of Bill and Joe Toye can't be overstated. Norm Dittrich, who is killed in a training jump prior to D-Day. This was actually going to be filmed for the miniseries, and I want to say a few of the actors mentioned the fact that they had either shot some footage for it or had at least done table reads with it, and it was going to happen. He's depicted in the miniseries. He's the one who's talking to Jimmy Matteo and says these are army noodles with ketchup, or Jimmy says his army noodles with ketchup because he said Dittrich says, you know, spaghetti ain't supposed to be orange. Anyway, he's killed. And apparently, when I talked to Bill about it, he said it was horrible because you could hear Dittrich screaming all the way to the ground. Uh, you know, not to be maudlin about it, but yeah, according to Bill, it was absolutely terrible. And then Bob Van Klinken, who was killed in Holland, moving through a row of bushes with a bazooka, as Easy's being partially overrun by German armor outside of Neuenen. So, you know, just an interesting group of guys depicted in this, and essentially identified and called out by the major. For the second slide, um, this one's a little bit less of storytelling on this one. I'll start. I'll cover the two of the ones that are ID'd. The first one's kind of fun to me because Scotty Gordon pointed this out to me because he talked to his dad about it. If you look all the way to the left, and again, these photos will all be posted on our Patreon page for everybody to take a look at, for our Patreon subscribers. If you look at Walter, you can see that he has one arm up. He actually has both arms up. According to Scotty, this was his dad's silent protest to Sobel by folding his arms. And I want to say there was one other trooper. And those of you who have seen high resolution versions of this photograph, you can probably go find the other trooper. And I want to say maybe it was Shifty that had his arms folded as well, but I won't commit to that. I'll have to go and look again. But at least in this photo, you can see that Walter's folding his arms, and I find that hysterical. That Scotty actually pointed that out to me. The other trooper that I want to talk about is Cleveland Petty. Cleveland O'Neill Petty actually went by O'Neill. Couple quick notes about Petty. One, he had transferred to the company at Fort Bragg. Was immediately placed in second platoon. He was a good old boy from Tennessee, and he was a trained machine gunner. And one of the things that one of the second platoon men told me about was O'Neill would pull out all the tracer rounds out of belts of ammunition, and he could fire a 30 caliber from the hip more accurately than any other machine gunner in his platoon. Not only that, he could do it without the tracers, so he didn't need to use the tracers to adjust his fire. And the trooper that in question, and again, if you go on my tours, you'll find out all this stuff in further detail, was pretty amazed that he was able to do it. Not only was he able to get strikes with his first few rounds on the target almost every time he saw it, but he was able to do so firing from the hip instead of being locked on a tripod, which was a much more stable firing platform. The other thing is, those of you who know about the miniseries Band of Brothers, you know that there were a lot of stories that were kind of combined, or stories attributed to one trooper that actually belonged to another, because they basically couldn't show 150 different guys within the miniseries. It would have just been far outstripped their ability to tell stories accurately and timely in an interesting way. But Petty was actually the one who punched the German artilleryman in the face with brass knuckles. For the longest time, everybody's believed it's Joe Toye. It's not really Joe Toye. They gave it to Petty because they had Petty behind the machine gun. But once they were advancing up to one of the gun pits, Petty was moving up with his gun, and one of the German surrenderies was there moving back, and he said something, and Petty didn't like the way this sounded. It, and Buck Compton actually told me it was Petty who did it. So for those of you who thought it was Joe Toye, it wasn't Joe. It was Cleveland Petty. It was O'Neill who did that. So that's it. I had a really fun time doing this, and I think I'll probably start sprinkling, these types of videos about Easy Company in there every once in a while. If you have any questions or comments, hopes for the future is always a joke we put in when I was asked my guys when I was a troop leader in the Marines. Um, if you have any hopes, questions, comments, hopes for the future, if you have any of those things, please hit us up. We're not lost private at gmail.com, or you can leave comments on the videos when this one drops onto YouTube, or you can hit us up on our Patreon page and drop me comments there. All are welcome, and I'll be glad to follow up on any of these, but I will not be giving away the goods with regards to the IDs of some of the folks that we talked about in here. Again, if you want those, you got to either read my books when they come out, or you're gonna have to come on a tour with me. Trust me, you won't be disappointed if you do the tours. With that said, lots of stuff cooking right now. Been chatting with several folks about coming on. Joe Balkowski, I want to bring him on. He is the foremost historian and author with regard to the 29th Infantry Division. I'm looking to get Joe on to talk about D-Day and then the fighting for St. Lo. Can't wait for that one. I'm trying to work out some times and dates to get Dev Ransami back on so he can talk about his most recent trip to Normandy and some more stuff on naval combat demolition units and the engineers and the beach battalions. I think that's going to be a dynamite show. Still angling to get Henry Sledge to come on and talk about his new book, and hopefully Leighton will take part in that. Looking to put the old band back together, get Leighton on a few more times. There's some stuff in the works with some other things. And then, of course, I'm still working out like some shows on Le Drurier and the fighting on D-Day and D+1 for the 101st Airborne, which I think is going to be a really cool show once I can get my head wrapped around all the different parts to it. That will probably be a couple of hour tour in terms of a show, which means I may break it up into a part 1 and part 2. Might be a D-Day on one day for one session, and D+1 on the next. But I'll have to see how how it rolls out. But anyway, thanks again for dropping by and checking out the broadcast, and I appreciate everybody more than you know. Oh, and I want to thank Chris, a new Patreon member who joined the team. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. But I'm looking forward to catching up with everybody in the future. Thanks, everybody. Bye.